Hi there. Welcome to Bourbon Turntable. This is the show that blends the love of music with the love of whiskey. Tonight, this is going to be a lot of fun because if you've watched this show at all, or seen Facebook posts and Instagram posts, you know that I have a great fondness and love for Buzzard's Roost, and Jason's been a friend for several years. And I've gotten to know Judy, who is co-founder at Buzzard's Roost, a little bit over the years, and we finally got her on the show, and so we're really excited about being able to hear from Judy. So, Judy, thank you for coming on.
Kevin, always good to talk to you. As I said to you when you called me, we've had some interesting conversations through the years, so I'm
We
looking forward to it.
we have, and we'll see. We may not be able to mimic those tonight, but I think we'll get into some good stuff. But before we do that, I want to tell everybody about the Bar Cart Co-op. The Bar Cart Co-op is a collection of friends who produce content for the whiskey enthusiast. We have shows like Distillers Talk with Alan Bishop and Christy Atkinson. Alan and Christy will talk about anything and everything in terms of distillation with distillers from across the country and around the world. Alan also has a show called One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute. Are you a distiller? Do you run into questions, problems, not really sure what to do? You can shoot a message over to Alan and he will post a video response to your question. Alan has another show that goes a little off, well, way off from Whiskey World, and that's the show called If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. In this show, he gets into the spiritual, the supernatural, the paranormal, you name it. He will cover it on that show. Every Monday night, 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Central Time, is My Whiskey Den. My Whiskey Den with Pat, Mike, and Mitch. They are where craft whiskey is king. You can tune in there. They have some wonderful guests, some fun tastings, and it's always great to hang out with the folks in the chat. Whiskey in My Wedding Ring is the brainchild of David Levine. David posts some great reviews on his blog, and he has a podcast where he will interview distillers. And then there's our show. If you're watching us right now on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. We would love to have you hang out with us every week. If you prefer to just listen, maybe you're driving, maybe, I don't know, maybe you're listening while you're in the shower. I don't know. Whatever the case may be, if you want to listen, you can tune in via podcast on Apple, Spotify, or Google. So, Judy, welcome to Bourbon Turntable.
Thank you.
Now, you have not been, you're now in the whiskey business, but you've not been in the whiskey business your whole life, I don't think. So, first of all, tell everybody where you're from. I believe you're a native Louisvillian. Is that correct?
I'm a native Kentuckian.
Native
I was
Kentuckian.
born in western part of Kentucky and came to Louisville at a fairly early age, high school age, and then I've lived a lot of places since then, but
Hmm.
Kentucky has always been home. So when I returned home, I guess it was 10 years ago,
Hmm.
I was like, this is it. I'm back. I'm staying. I'm not going anywhere again.
Yeah. Now, so your career, like I said, didn't start in the whiskey world.
No, it did not.
So tell everybody a little bit about what your history is.
Yeah, it's been a interesting career path. I've been a corporate person. I spent my, you know, 30 years in the corporate world.
Hmm.
Started out on the tech side. My degrees are in math, so immediately went to work for IBM and did the, technical thing and technical
Hmm.
sales and marketing and did that for a while and came back to Kentucky for a family reason. And when I came back to
Hmm.
Kentucky, I went to work for Kentucky Fried Chicken or Yum, it wasn't quite Yum Brands yet,
Hmm.
and then a very different role. They hired me in this VP supply chain role because they wanted the tech background
Hmm.
to get the supply chain more up to date. And that turned out, I said, I really don't know anything about supply chain, but luckily I learned
Hmm.
fast, did that, and then went on to be senior VP of supply chain for the Wendy's brand.
Yeah. Now,
Did
so
that globally.
supply
So,
chain, you're talking about purchasing and keeping
well,
product rolling
really
in or
everything.
probably rolling out as well.
Well, everything, working with manufacturers
Mhm.
on developing products that would be used in the restaurant, quality assurance to make sure that the products meet the standards, logistics, distribution,
Mhm.
of course, acquiring products. So, it's the whole gamut.
Yeah. Yeah. So you went from Yum to Wendy's?
Wendy's.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And how long now when you were working for Yum,
Hmm.
were you here in Louisville or were you
I
working out?
was.
Okay.
I was. I was here in Louisville for that time, and then moved away again. Went to Columbus, Ohio. Dave Thomas hired me, I'll have to say, and
Yeah.
he was a wonderful man. And
What-
since he'd had his start in Kentucky Fried Chicken, when
mhm.
he introduced me to the board of directors, he said, "So here's my chicken girl."
So
So I
so
get
you worked you may not have worked for Colonel Sanders, but you had the
I,
icon of Colonel Sanders and you had the icon of Dave Thomas.
I did.
Yeah. So how does that compare to working with the icon of Jason Bronner?
Well, it's very similar. It's very similar. I mean, Dave didn't have a beard. Of course, the Colonel did,
Yes.
and they were all bigger than life, and
Hmm.
that's Jason.
Yes. So you went from Wendy's, you went on to what?
I came back. I took early retirement,
Hmm.
and wanted to come back to Kentucky, and did some consulting for a while I was figuring out what I wanted to do next.
Hmm.
And I wanted to do something on my own. I'd been in the corporate world, at a nice level for, 30 years, and said it's time to do something different. Must be on my own. And I wanted to be very Kentucky oriented.
Hmm.
And, bourbon fits that. And bourbon also fit for me because managing a supply chain in food, where you have to worry about the taste, you have to worry about it being in proper condition, and in the bourbon industry, meeting the proper legal standards.
Right.
In food, it was much more about meeting all the safety standards, but it very similar. And so when I met Jason, and I met Jason on a barrel pick, and from there I said, this is it. This is what I want to do next.
Yeah. Yeah. So before you obviously before you were with the barrel pick scenario, you were into whiskey at least to some degree before
Sure,
Buzzard
of
Roost. So
course, of
talk,
course.
how did that whiskey journey start for you, or was it just okay? You were you were growing up in Kentucky, and that's just kind of like
Yeah,
fish and
yeah.
water.
I think that's it. Growing up in Kentucky, bourbon is sort of a part of the culture here. I mean, I remember the first time I tasted bourbon, I was probably, I hate to say this, but I was probably 10 years old.
Probably.
Not that I drank bourbon, but my aunt decided Christmas, she's 10 years old. She can have the boiled custard with bourbon in it instead of having the plain old boiled custard, with
Yeah.
nothing in it. And I thought it was absolutely fabulous. Best tasting stuff I'd ever seen. I mean, I love that caramel flavor,
Yeah.
that, little bit of a bite. I thought it was delicious. So, obviously I didn't drink whiskey until, I'd like to say 21, but of course everybody
Let's
knows
just say
that's not true.
we'll say 21. That's okay.
Yeah, that's right. They're close to 21. Yeah, at
Yes,
least.
21-ish. Uh,
Yeah,
so
21-ish. Yeah.
21-ish. So at that point, what did the whiskey cabinet look like for Judy?
It's interesting. I thought back, I was not adventurous in whiskey. My family, well, my aunts and uncles, my parents didn't drink.
Mhm.
But aunts and uncles, friends, Maker's Mark was the bourbon that
Sure.
they drank, and that was my go-to for a long time.
Hmm.
I have to say, I have to credit wine for making me more adventurous and wanting to taste more things.
Hmm.
When I when I lived in California, for several years, I went up to the wine country every weekend. And it was just my go-to place.
Yeah.
And tasted lots of whiskeys and learned lots about it. And after that, as I traveled, I would, whether it was France or wherever it was, I would always go to wineries, drink
Hmm.
whiskey. I would study, I'm sorry, drink wine. I would study wine.
Yeah.
When I came back to Kentucky, I said, whiskey is the same. You need to study it. You need to taste all the different kinds, the different mash bills, the different preparations. You need to delve into whiskey just like I did to wine.
Hmm.
And, it is a very interesting, very intricate flavor, wonderful, wonderful
Hmm.
product.
Yeah. See, wine got me into whiskey, but it was a little different.
Did it?
And I didn't get into whiskey till very late in life. I was probably in my mid 40s,
Mm,
and I would like to drink wine, but my wife didn't drink. So if I opened a bottle, you either have to pretty much finish the bottle or it's going to go
that's
bad.
right. That's right.
So I talked with Chris Zaborowski at Westport Whiskey and Wine.
Yeah.
I said,
Yeah.
"Chris, this is what I'm dealing with here." And he goes, "Well, you can use these stoppers and whatever." And he goes, "But, have you thought about trying some whiskey?" I said, "Well, what should I start with?" And that's how I got into whiskey. So
Yeah.
this is all Chris's fault.
Chris is a good educational person for all
He's
of us.
fabulous.
I
He's
mean,
fabulous.
yeah, yeah, he
I
is.
I owe a lot of what little I know to Chris and listening to
Yeah.
him and watching him, and he's he's missed in that role in this city.
Absolutely
Yeah.
missed. Yeah. But the thing I'll have to say that I was very glad to see doing a barrel pick with
Hmm.
him and with Robin once. I was really glad to see Robin's got an excellent palate
Hmm.
too, and I thought the barrel she picked was better than Chris's.
Well,
Now, my husband,
Chris has a profile, and he kind of sticks to that.
he does, yeah.
Yeah.
And my husband thought Chris's barrel was one of the best he had tasted. So, it is. We all have preferences.
Yeah. Um, so, what would you say is the most important application from what you learned in the corporate world that you brought to
Mm.
Buzzard Roost?
I think it is one, the problem solving,
Mhm,
taking each thing that comes up and, getting through to a solution that's acceptable.
mhm,
I think, learning to work as a team is very, very important in this business. And even, when you have differing opinions and differing points of view, being able to learn from each other, talk through it, and
mhm,
get to a solution. I mean, I think everybody knows Jason and I are very different people, but we work well as a team because we come at things from different points of view.
mhm.
So,
It is a definitely a counterparts thing with you and Jason, I
yeah,
think.
yeah, very much. And surprisingly often our palates agree on
Mhm.
products. So,
Yeah.
that's I think that was the thing we learned on the first barrel pick, that
Mhm.
we may see the world through different lenses, but we do agree on good taste. And I think just my philosophy, Kevin, is determination, drive, not giving up is what's really crucial in any business.
Yeah.
And I think right now in this industry, everybody was expecting the bourbon industry to grow, double every year. And this year it has not doubled.
Right.
It's been about the same as last year. And when you've been in business as long as I have, you realize that that is a pattern that happens in every industry.
Right.
And don't panic. Take a deep breath. Look at anything you need to do better and do it better and work hard. And this too shall pass. And I'm a firm believer in that.
Yeah. Well, Buzzard Roost has certainly been on a growth trajectory in its
Yes,
5 years and
it
plus.
has for sure. Yeah,
And one of the things that you added this year was this bottled in bond. So
yes,
there's my little photo of that. So it is a wheated bourbon
it
sourced from
is.
MGP,
Yeah,
high wheat, 51
high
corn,
wheat.
45 wheat, four malted barley. So let's have a pour of that. Cheers, Judy.
Cheers.
Now, this is your first wheated product,
It
correct?
is.
Yep.
Now, Jason has never been a fan of wheated bourbon. I
Hmm.
have been. As I told you, I started drinking Maker's Mark.
Right.
So, my palate was developed early for that. And William LaRue Weller, thought,
Right.
oof, that's some of the best whiskey I've tasted. So, yeah, I like wheated bourbon. And so I
Mhm.
convinced Jason, you know, hey, let me have one. Come on, let me do a wheated bourbon. And he's been surprised. He really likes
Yeah.
it. It turned out well. And I think our second barreling, everything we do, we put it into our own proprietary barrel.
Right.
And it it tones down it. Yes, it is. You get vanilla, you get caramel, you get all those flavors,
Hmm.
but it's not overly sweet. I think some people
Right.
object to, it's too bready, it's too sweet. I don't like wheated bourbon. I
Hmm.
mean, I really thought this came out balanced. I don't know
Yeah.
what you think, but
Yeah.
I
I
was
like it.
pleased.
I like it a lot. I think there's definitely some brown sugar in it.
Hmm.
I got like an orange cream savor, those little hard candies, and
Yes.
some little bread pudding, some black tea, some
Yeah.
cinnamon. I think it's got a lot going on, uh,
Yeah.
and what it's got going on is all very, very good. Uh,
Yeah.
I think, and I don't know this for a fact, but I think this is the only secondary aged bottled in bond bourbon. Nah,
I think it is. It's the only one that I have seen.
yeah, I've tried to
And
do some searches and I've not found another,
mm, no,
but
and I do think you're right. The flavor notes you were picking up, and I think are perfect for this time of year, for
mhm,
Thanksgiving, for holidays. Like you said, you get nice baking spices. I get cinnamon on the finish of the product. Bread pudding. I hadn't thought of that, but absolutely. I mean,
yeah,
it is just, to me, cool evening, great sipping whiskey,
yeah,
and it pairs very well with food.
mm,
You know, I one of the things I want to see us do in this industry is recognize that bourbon does pair very well with food. You don't have to serve it before the meal and then put it away until the end of the meal.
right,
It really it really goes with food. And um,
uh,
I when I see an invitation to a wine dinner, I think, why isn't that a bourbon dinner? And we are doing more bourbon dinners in Kentucky. I
right,
just don't know if we are anywhere else. And I think it's time we start.
yeah, but because um, with the the food pairings with bourbon, and I believe Buzzard Roost has done a chocolate and whiskey
We do,
pairing,
yeah,
right?
chocolate and whiskey, yeah,
Uh, um, but I would like to see more of that done, and I
I
think
would
that
too, yeah.
there's a little bit of that, and I know like when Mike Veach does his reviews, he'll
Mhm,
eat a cranberry or some nuts and
right,
discuss the different tasting notes with that. But I think
yeah,
it can go a long way beyond that, and
absolutely,
what bourbons can pair well with beef or with pork or with fish
that's
or
right.
you know.
Yeah. See, I think that's important. We did for Bourbon Women at their
Mhm,
symposium this year. I called my friend Weta Michael, who's a noted, James Beard
mhm,
award-winning chef, and said, "Would you work with us on pairing each of our bourbons with either a charcuterie meat
mhm.
and a compote or dried food or whatever with that, and with cheese?" And so she sent charged two of her chefs to do that,
Right.
and fabulous. I mean, it was such a good presentation. So I'm really working with our team. It's time for us to add not just chocolate and whiskey, but let's have, charcuterie and whiskey, and how do you pair, and go on from
Yeah.
there. I mean, we look at all the people that come to Kentucky. We've got to keep adding things of interest for them to do to make them want to make that second and third and fourth and every year trip.
Right.
I mean, that's what Napa and Sonoma did, and we've got to do that. And I think we can all find plenty to do with bourbon.
Yes. Uh, more than just drink it, but we'll drink it first too.
Mhm, mhm.
uh,
Nothing wrong with just tasting. I agree with that.
so you said that you had met Jason at a barrel pick,
Yeah,
and what do you remember what you were picking?
I do. I called Jason. I didn't know him from Adam,
Hmm.
but my husband and I had talked it over, and I wanted to buy part of a barrel. I was doing consulting at that time, and most of my clients, were CEOs of good sized companies. And
Hmm.
so I wanted to buy a part of a barrel to send them for Christmas gifts, with my company's name on it and that sort of
Sure.
thing. And I had read that Jason, you know, that from Bourbon's Bistro would do barrel picks with people. So I, out of the blue, called him up and said, "This is what I want to do." And he said, "Well, okay, I guess we could do that." So I said, "You pick where we go." I don't have a preference, don't have any contacts, couldn't get in the door anywhere. So you tell us where we're going. And he picked, Four Roses.
Yeah.
And I was so lucky, I think about it on that pick because Jim Rutledge attended the
Mm.
pick.
Yeah.
And I got to know Jim from that, and then from a subsequent pick we did, and from, meetings Jason and I had with him. And I thought, well, that was kind of the ideal way to begin to get my feet
Yes.
wet in the
Yeah. That
whiskey.
you're starting at the top.
It's starting at the top. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
you didn't work your way up that ladder at all. You started pretty high up. Uh, so when did the idea of you and Jason working together to co-found Buzzard Roost come from?
you know, I had known Jason probably a year, and I was thinking in, my own mind, I want to get that next business of mine started. What do I want to do? And my husband and I were in Bourbon's Bistro having dinner. Jason came over and sat down for a while, and he was saying, "I'm really thinking that I want to start a distillery." And I said, I, I'm thinking I want to be in that business too. Why don't you come over and let's spend some time talking about it? So he
Hmm.
came over, sat, in our living room with my husband and me, and we just talked about what skills I brought to the table,
Mhm.
and what skills he brought to the table, and that probably was a good match.
Yeah.
The other thing that was really important is, Andrew Weehabrink
Mhm.
and Jason were friends, and Andrew really afforded us the opportunity to dig deep into barrel science.
Right.
And that's what sold me on, yes, we can make whiskey that I'm going to be very proud
Yeah.
because, having developed various products, when I was with, KFC and with Wendy's, you're working with manufacturers, understanding what makes a difference in product, whether it's, texture, flavor, whatever,
Right.
what can you do that makes a really outstanding product? And I, really looked at it and said, what Andrew is doing with the study he's done on barrels, absolutely
Yeah.
essential, because that is the flavor drive.
Yeah. And the to me, the best use of MGP product is what you all are doing at Buzzard
I
Roost.
agree. I agree.
I mean, it's everywhere,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
honestly, I I kind of got fatigued of it.
Yeah.
But the when I first tried that 2 barrel small batch and that single barrel in 2019, my th-
Yeah.
this is this is something special because
It is.
there are certain notes that you get from like 3 year MGP product that I
Sure.
don't necessarily enjoy that much, but your barrel science application to that liquid just really brought out the best parts of that.
And Kevin, I think one of the things that surprised me is when we started, I always thought, well, the recipe is a 4-year old and we'll put it in a barrel for whatever time it takes, whether
Right.
it's 8 weeks or a year, we keep tasting it till we have what we want. And that's the recipe. And you really can't do much with older MGP. Well, you know, Barry Yonke, twisted my arm here,
Mhm.
why don't you buy some of this 7-year-old, 8-year-old? Oh,
Right.
here's a 10-year-old. You ought to
Right.
try that. Well, I'll be darned, one of those we put down in the barrel for a year.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, this will either be ruined and we can, throw away a perfectly good investment and I can
Mhm.
let, everybody yell at me and that'll be okay. Or this may turn out great. Instead, that was the 11-year-old that we released not long ago.
Mhm.
And boy, was it good.
Yeah.
It was complex. It it was what I would call elegant.
Yeah.
Just elegant. And I said I never ever expected that that to work like that.
Yeah. Well, it has worked, and it's
Yeah.
worked really well uh, for the last 5 years. So
Mhm.
let's go back in a time machine, and we're um, sitting around at July of 2019, I believe it was.
I was.
What was the thing that you thought this is the key to Buzzard Drew's success?
Yeah, it was the barrel. It was the knowledge that we had of all of the research that Independent Stave had done around barrels, and it was tasting the various toasts
Mm-hmm.
and seeing what flavors they brought forward
Mm-hmm.
and deciding, what combination of barrels would produce a flavor that we liked. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I feel like we're just on the verge of it. I mean, Jason and I had a product meeting last week with some other team members, and tell you, we had some ideas and I said, I feel like it's, you know, Jason, you're called Master Blender, but I don't think we've challenged you enough. I think we've got some ideas that are going to, blow the socks off people.
Yeah. Make him work harder.
And
Make him work hard.
well, that's always a challenge, Kevin. You know that.
I'll tell you, the thing I've observed about Jason is he has this very laid back persona and just kind of
Mhm.
let's kind of lets the everything go with the flow. But you watch him and you can see the wheels
He's
spinning
always
in his
thinking.
head,
Yeah.
and he'll like start fidgeting with stuff. Okay, that's not quite in the right place, and there's a smudge on that glass, and he's always working towards perfection,
He is.
um,
He
but
is.
has that very laid back persona
He
while
does.
he's doing it.
He
And
does.
uh, I think that's a very interesting combination. And I think that the experience that you bring to the table, coupled with that, I
Yeah.
mean, there are a lot of brands that start, and there are a lot of brands that don't have the level of success that you guys have had in a fairly
Right.
short period of time. And I
Yeah.
think it's got it.
Yeah.
And granted, the barrel aspect of it is what drives the flavor of the whiskey, but I
Yeah.
think that it's the leadership from you and from Jason that has
Yeah.
charted the course and paved the way uh,
Yeah.
for what you're in 45 states now. Is that right?
No, we're in 25.
25. I thought you could ship to others though, couldn't you? Is that
Oh,
or
we
am I?
can. Oh,
Okay. Yeah.
we can ship to 45 states.
Yeah.
So yeah, we
Okay.
can sell, but actually
On the
having
shelf. Yeah.
distribution on
Yeah.
the shelf, we're in 25.
Yeah.
It was interesting today. I was looking because we're beginning that planning process for 2025,
Hmm.
and I had pulled from I don't know what source, but you know mm, good database. I had pulled what states sell most whiskey.
Hmm.
Well, it was interesting to know that Kentucky's like number 4 or 5. We're not
Hmm.
near we're not at the top, but
Right.
it's okay. We'll get
Yeah.
there anyway. But I went through that whole list, and we are in all but 4 of those heavily whiskey buying
Hmm.
states. So I said, well, you know, I think we've picked the right ones, and
Yeah.
we have a plan in place to get into all the others. So we're moving along.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, well, obviously Kentucky was the first, and then I think
Mhm.
added Massachusetts, oddly
Massachusetts,
enough, right?
very
uh,
oddly enough, and a distributor approached me and
yeah.
said, I tasted your product, and I can't remember where they even tasted it.
Hmm.
We would love it, and I said, "We'll give it a chance." I said, "No, no, you're out there, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time with you, but let's go." And
Yeah.
it's been a good market for us.
Yeah. Well, I've, when I travel, I'll, one of the things that pops up, on my Google searches is whiskeys near me, whiskey store near me, liquor store near me.
Right?
And so if I'm, wherever,
Yeah.
I'll, you know, dash in a store, see what they've got. And I see your bottles everywhere now. And that's
Good. I'm
really
glad
good
to hear
sign.
that.
Really good sign.
Glad to hear that.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. So the, is there a moment in the last 5 years that you thought, um, well, I really think that we've, not that you're going to rest on your laurels, but you think, okay, we've made it.
Oh no.
We've hit a spot.
No. No, but I don't think I'm that kind of person,
Yeah.
and so that's part of it. I mean, if you look at my career, one of the things I was known for was continuous improvement.
Yeah.
And so when you're known for continuous improvement, you don't ever really get to the point that you go, "Oh boy, this is great. We've
Right.
made it."
Right.
You just are always going, well, this is good, but now we can make
Right.
this better and this better, and let's do this, and I think that's the way it'll always be. And I
Yeah.
think I mean, I hope, I know Jason feels the same way.
Yeah.
Let's keep making better and better bourbon. There's
Yeah.
plenty of things we haven't tried, plenty of flavors out there from barrels. Let's keep blending.
Yeah. So let me kind of ask the same question, but ask it a different way. Is there a success that you've achieved in these 5 years that you're most proud of?
I think we got three very, very impressive awards in a short period of time in August.
Hmm.
And that sort of took my breath away to say, "Phew, we're doing something right."
Yeah.
We entered the international whiskey competition, and our Char 1 rye got best rye in the world, best American rye in the
Wow.
world. And I was like, "Oh, that's great."
Yeah.
Then the next week, we got a letter from barleycorn competition, and there those people that judge that are New Yorkers, and they're tough. I mean, a lot of them are. So we got our toasted American oak bourbon got
Hmm.
best bourbon. I was like, wow. And then our PR agent sends me a note. By the way, um, wine and not enthusiast, wine. How could I forget? But wine advocate.
Hmm.
Is that right? Yeah. Rated your bottle and bond 95. And I was like, whoa, you know?
Yeah.
And they were all in about a week and a half's time. And I was going, you
Yeah.
know, we're not just preaching to ourselves, other people are seeing the quality.
Yeah.
And that's important.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was wine enthusiast.
And thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Um, no, and I think just what I see um, is a lot more a growing interest in your product and a real excitement when a new product comes out.
I
And
hope
and
so.
that's a very, very good sign, I would
Yeah.
think, for what you're trying to do as a business.
Well, we laugh at Whiskey Row. We always say we'll know we're on the right track when we announce that we're releasing a product and there's a line outside the door.
Yeah.
And and that's not happening yet, but we're getting there.
Well, it will. It absolutely
It will.
will. And I think you guys have really done a good job with Whiskey Row. There are you
Mhm.
and Jason there at the bar
Yeah.
at Whiskey Row. What was the significance of being able to open that
Mhm.
spot?
You know, Jason and I both felt that it was really important to have a home for
Hmm.
the brands, since we were sourcing whiskey and, you know, we don't appear real. We don't appear a brand you can trust if we don't have a presence.
Hmm.
And we thought it had to be on Whiskey Rose so that it really was, the tradition of where bourbon grew up in Louisville. And
Right.
so it was just important to us to be there, to be
Yeah.
able to meet visitors, talk to visitors about our whiskey, I mean, that's one of the things that's most fun about the job for both of us is all the
Mhm.
people we get to talk to
Right.
about whiskey,
Yeah.
about bourbon,
Yeah.
about rye, about, you know, all sorts of things.
Yeah. Let's try this other one. The toasted barrel is my personal favorite.
Yeah.
And
The toasted barrel rye.
toasted barrel rye. And I had been on I think the Toasted Barrel came out in what, 2020? Toasted Barrel Rye, is that right?
20. It was early on in our career.
Yeah.
We did rise before bourbons.
Right.
It was a big deal when we released our first bourbon.
Yeah.
So,
And
but we were very pleased. Jason
yeah.
always said we made, bourbon lovers rise.
Hmm.
And I am amazed at how many people, when I'm doing a tasting, will say to me, "Oh, I don't like rye."
Right.
They'll taste ours and go, "Oh, wow."
Yeah. I've kind of consistently been on Jason to have barrel strength toasted barrel rye um,
Mm.
available like that.
Now, is that one that you're tasting? Were you
Hmm.
tasting a single barrel toasted
I am
rye?
the my regular toasted barrel rye. I had finished it, so I've got this Kentucky Bourbon Festival single barrel. That's a toasted barrel at barrel strength.
Oh, that was a good one too. Ooh.
Yes.
When we
The
picked that one, we said, "Yeah, hold that one. That's the one."
the nose on it is just amazing because to me it just kind of comes in waves at you. You may get cherry, then you may get some vanilla, you may get some caramel, you may get some mint, and it's just a lot of fun to just sit and nose it for a few minutes,
Mhm.
and all those
And
flavors really carry through.
this one is, the regular toasted barrel rye that I'm drinking, and
Mhm.
I'm getting a lot of spice.
Mm.
Um, sometimes with these, people will say, "Oh, I get the mint or the dill." I'm
Mhm.
not getting that at all. I'm just getting a lot of really nice baking spice,
Mhm.
getting some. I'm even getting a little cardamom and,
Mm.
cinnamon.
Yeah, I I think it's a wonderful product, um, and
Well, it's been one of our best sellers.
yeah, and for good reason.
And yeah, the mouth feel on this product is what attracted me most. It really does coat your palate, so you get,
Yeah,
I mean, I tend to sip and hold it in my mouth, a minute before I swallow, and you really do get all the flavor.
yeah, and you just look at your glass. It's you can see the legs just clinging to the side of it,
Mhm,
and
mhm,
so it's very oily, full of flavor,
mhm, it is.
wonderful stuff.
It
Love it,
is.
love
It
it.
you know, it, yeah, it's amazing to, be from a state that has such a wonderful product.
Yeah. Uh, so we've talked about the bottled and bond. We've talked about the toasted barrel rye. You said that bottled and bond is your current favorite, and your favorite rye is a toasted barrel rye.
Mhm.
Eh, Why do you? Are there others that you obviously it's like asking which one of your kids is your favorite, but are there others that you just are kind of a go to for you?
Well, I don't know if it's a go-to because it was such a limited quantity, but, we do LTOs
Hmm.
periodically. And, most people will come up to me and say, "Oh, cigar rye. I love your
Yes.
cigar rye." And yes, I agree. It's a delightful product. But the LTO that I love, and I think we will do it again next year, is the toasted French oak bourbon.
Hmm.
And I just loved that product.
Yeah.
It's complex. It is, the toasted American oak has sweeter, more vanilla on the front end.
Hmm.
The toasted French oak on the front end is just, you get a little bit of a maybe could possibly be sweet if you go further, but I'm not gonna tell you yet. That sort of thing.
Right.
And then it's like you said, it's oily, the viscosity is wonderful, and the finish on it is just it lingers,
Yeah.
and you take a breath after that last drink, and you go, boy, that was really good.
Yeah. But your products are special enough. I mean, most of them are available when you want them. Obviously, you have the LTOs,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
but they're special enough that I mean, I use them as special occasion
Mhm.
uh, pours as well. Um, had some friends that, yeah, I got to know online, and the first time that we got together, they came to Kentucky. We were on my patio drinking Buzzard's Roost barrel strength rye. Um, had a
Mhm.
friend, Drew Crawley, who is a musician, and he just released his new album last week, and so we're at his album release party drinking
Oh,
cigar
nice.
rye. So it's a very special
Yeah,
product to me for a lot of
yeah,
reasons, personal reasons, but it's also just really, really good.
it is good. And, we designed it to be premium product.
Hmm.
I will admit that we're now saying, can we do a product that's less expensive and an everyday drinker?
Well,
And,
American
we're
whiskey,
talking about that.
the American
American
whiskey.
whiskey is.
Yeah,
American whiskey is, yeah,
yeah.
very definitely more affordable. Now, the thing that I just learned, and I talked about my persistence, and I think it paid off this time. I called TTB and said, wait, I was originally told that if I put bourbon into a used barrel, it couldn't be called bourbon. And they said, well, go back, tell us again what you did. And I said, well, I took bourbon that was in a new oak barrel
Hmm.
and I finished it in a once used Buzzard's Roost oak barrel. Been
Hmm.
used once. So how can people put it in wine barrels and rum barrels and everything else and call it bourbon and I can't? And they said, "Oh, you can't. You just have to say finished in."
Right.
I said, "So
So in your case, it would be Kentucky straight or straight bur-
not
straight
straight.
s- straight bourbon
Bourbon whiskey.
finished in bourbon barrels.
That's it.
Right.
Finished in bourbon barrels."
Yeah.
So don't be surprised if you see American whiskey go away and bourbon whiskey finished in, and we're figuring out how to word it. Come
Mhm.
along to replace that.
Yeah. Was again new product came out this year. Fantastic. Really enjoyed it, and a very fair price point.
Yeah. Yeah, and that used barrel allows us to have a much more favorable price point,
Yeah.
and I'll tell you, it's a really good whiskey. I'm really pleased
Yeah.
at how it came out. It's not as complex as, our high-end premium whiskeys, but darn, it's good sipping whiskey.
It
What
is.
else, can you ask
Absolutely.
for?
Absolutely is. Absolutely
Yeah.
is. Um, let's talk about music a little bit. Is that okay?
Mm.
So,
Well,
you grew up. Well, your teenage years or your high school years were here in Louisville.
mhm.
Um, did you go to any concerts at any of the local uh, venues when you're
You know,
younger?
no, I don't think at high school age I did. I was pretty studious and quiet and I graduated from high school when I was 16. So I was a little bit younger than everybody else and didn't get out much. In
Yeah,
college, I started going to concerts.
yeah,
And during that young period of my life, I listened a lot to soul music, of course, rock and roll, but
yeah,
soul was really the big thing. And
yeah.
then I hit 30. I was living in Chicago and said, "Oh, this jazz stuff is the best music I've
Very
ever
cool.
heard." And so I went to Jazz Showcase, in Michigan Avenue a lot, and got to know the owner, so he would always, let me come in at a price that I could afford and listen to music. And that I'm just sold on jazz.
Yeah.
I one of when I moved back here for those years that I was at Yum, a friend and I started a series of concerts. We did, I think, 5 or 6 every summer
Yeah.
down on the lawn at the water tower. And we did various jazz concerts and
Very
had a
cool.
great time doing it. I got to meet some great jazz musicians that I was a fan of and would not have gotten to meet any other way. And so, that's been my jam in music is
Oh, I love it.
jazz.
I love it. So let's go back and talk about the soul music for just a little bit.
Yeah.
Who were some of the artists or the bands that you were
Oh,
listening to there?
Wilson Pickett,
Yeah.
was I mean, you know, it was
Yeah.
like, how could he possibly be gone? That's,
Yeah.
it's wonderful. And, Aretha Franklin was always
Yeah.
terrific and she, carried on forever. And then, you know, just, you know, just, I don't know, all of that, BB
Yeah.
King,
Yeah.
really, like Ben E. King, I
Yeah.
can remember when I was at Vanderbilt early. I ended up graduating from the University of Kentucky, but I started out at Vanderbilt, and a lot of the concerts there would be in Nashville would be 5 or 6 musicians in one night.
Right.
And so, you'd get some great musicians in, and that- yeah, I
Yeah.
liked it a lot. Of course,
A lot of music to choose from in Nashville.
a lot, yeah. And I will have to admit I'm not a country music fan,
Right.
but there is other music in Nashville, and you just have to look for it.
Right. Anymore, if you're a country music musician or a country music band in Nashville, you're kind of the oddity.
Yeah,
They've kind of
yeah.
gone every other direction but
They
country, I
have
think.
every other direction. Yeah. Now I haven't seen much of jazz come out of there,
Yeah.
but New Orleans, you can go there.
Yeah.
We used to, my husband and I used to always go to the, Jazz and Heritage Festival, and we haven't done that in a couple of years. I think COVID kind of stopped that festival and stopped us for a little bit. But,
Yeah.
and then, Chicago, New York always have, you can always find
Yeah.
really good jazz.
So when you're listening to jazz, what there's lots of different genres or eras in jazz. Is
Yeah.
there something that you really gravitate to, or something that you really got you into it then?
I think my mother, I realized it did have a big effect, and I didn't realize it until I was older and got over anything my mother did had to be
Right.
wrong. And we all go through that. Um, I she listened she listened to, Duke Ellington. She
Yeah.
listened to Nat King Cole. She listened to Ella Fitzgerald. She listened to Satchmo, she called
Yeah.
and I realized I heard that in the background growing up, and that probably had an impact. And I really like just straight ahead jazz,
Hmm.
and I like a lot of the jazz ballads. I
Yeah.
like some of the women today that are, Diana Krall, and
Yeah.
some of the women that are reviving a lot of the old jazz ballads.
Yeah. Well, you had
And then I like, straight ahead jazz. I got to meet Dexter Gordon one at a time when I was in Chicago. And, I mean, he's one of the greatest musicians I'd ever heard, and
yeah.
hearing him in person was just amazing.
Yeah. Uh,
And yeah,
yeah. No, that I think a lot of musicians that start in jazz and maybe get into rock music or popular music are some of the more talented that you'll find,
yeah,
because jazz is pretty demanding
very
in terms of what
demanding.
you're able to do,
Yes.
and being able
Yeah.
to um, pick up something on the fly and just go with it.
Yeah.
Um,
Just go with it. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. When we were doing jazz concerts, and then when I was in Columbus, Ohio, I was on the board of the Columbus Jazz Orchestra, and their jazz orchestra had larger um, viewing people that came to the concert
yeah,
than the Columbus Orchestra did. I mean, it was fabulous. Most of them were professors at Ohio State. There were some other people, and then we always brought people in. And, you would just realize that many jazz musicians are classically trained.
hmm
And then, like that improvisation and that
hmm
ability to just, create,
yeah,
innovate, like us with bourbon,
right.
innovation.
Yes. No, that's a uh, good thought on pairing jazz with bourbon. But
Yeah.
now,
Yeah,
have you? No, go ahead.
I do think it goes well together.
Yeah. Have you thought about bringing in a jazz trio to the Buzzard Juice Whiskey
Yeah.
experience?
Yeah, I have. And I think Jason would like to, bring in music that's more to his taste, and I'd like to
Hmm.
bring in jazz, and I think we can compromise and do both. So
Yeah,
don't be surprised if you see that coming up.
I would love that. That would be wonderful. I'd love it. That'd be great.
And I don't know if you were around and saw it, but last year on Repeal Day, we sort of did a combination of a barrel roll and a second line, and we had jazz musicians playing
Mhm.
behind Jason and me as
Yeah.
Jason rolled the barrel, I waved the flag, and the musicians were behind me, and then other people behind them, and it was a great day.
Yeah. Yeah.
We sneaked a little jazz in there.
No, that's good. I think that's really good. I there's not enough, or maybe I'm just not looking in the right places, but I don't think there's enough jazz in Louisville.
No, there used to be,
Yep.
years ago, I belonged to a group here, Louisville Jazz Society. We did a lot of concerts, had, a lot of musicians come to town, and I just don't see it anymore. And
Yeah. Yeah. That would be that'd be good to see. And I think your love of music and Jason's love of music kind of makes putting all that
yeah,
together at Buzzard Roost
yeah,
kind of a no brainer.
yeah. I've always loved good food and, good drink and good music. And what can be better than, sitting around, sipping some bourbon, talking to friends, listening to music. I mean, to me, that's kind of the essence of life.
That's why I started this
Yeah,
show.
I can see that.
Is
Yeah,
there were too many conversations on out on my patio or the back deck of listening to music and talking about music and talking about whiskey and drinking whiskey and talking about
yeah.
life and
Talking about life.
uh,
Yeah,
other
yeah.
people must be interested in this too. So there you go. One thing that you were talking about made me wonder in your role in corporate America,
Hmm.
that wasn't necessarily that public facing, I wouldn't think. Now you're in a role in with a lot of interest in your brand from
Hmm.
what you're doing.
Hmm.
Um, how have you found dealing and interacting with the public?
You know, I've always enjoyed interacting with the public. Yeah, in my roles, yeah, I didn't interact particularly with the public, and in my roles with IBM, it was very much corporate customers,
Hmm.
and I was noted for building very strong relationships with them. At Yum Brands, it was all about my relationship with franchisees.
Mm-hmm.
and suppliers. Wendy's, the same thing with franchisees and suppliers. And so getting to know people, building relationships, that's one of the things that I like most about life. I
Yeah.
just, there's everybody has a story, it's interesting. I want to know more about them, want to know how they view life that I may not, that I learned something from them. So I've just transferred it over to, public facing, working at Whiskey Row.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I did a tasting on Friday night at one of our neighborhood liquor stores,
Mm-hmm.
and had a fabulous time just talking to people. There were people from out of town. That surprised me how many people were visiting Louisville and staying in Airbnbs in the Highlands.
Yeah.
I figured everybody that came to town went downtown. So I was glad to see that, and met some fascinating people. I looked up and 3 hours had passed like that.
Yeah.
So, um, I mean, I enjoy it.
Yeah. Well,
It
that,
unfortunately, I don't get to do it a lot, Kevin.
yeah.
Just, as I'm sure as you find in your career, there's an awful lot of thought and heads down time
Right.
problem solving.
Well, and getting to, interact with clients and interact with coworkers and like you mentioned earlier, problem solving. Here's what we've
Mhm.
got. How do we get it to where we want it to be?
That's it.
Yeah. So what are the next goals in line for Buzzard Roost?
hmm Continued growth. I think, for me, the next goal is that we become an established brand, one that, really does, you know, pull off the shelf, has steady followers.
Hmm.
Um, we just continue to grow.
Yeah.
I mean, I felt really good this year at Kentucky Bourbon Festival. Last year at Kentucky Bourbon Festival, most of our interaction was telling people who we were.
Hmm.
This year it was Buzzard's Roost. Oh, I have cigar rye.
Yeah.
I just got bottled and bond. I mean,
Right.
people knew who we were, and I came away from that just feeling so good and thinking that that times 10 is where we want to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that growth is the key to that growth greater bandwidth in terms of having product ready for market? Is it developing new LTOs or expanding what you're doing with those LTOs, or is it developing the supply chain? What's the key to that?
Well, I think it is, the old liquid to lips, getting more and more and more people to taste their product. I mean,
Yeah.
now they're real, what I would call bourbon aficionados that know about us. There are a lot of other people that have never heard of us. If they're the occasional bourbon drinker, they don't know who we are.
Right.
So, I think it is just interacting with more and more people, doing more and more tastings, doing, being accessible to more and more people is
Yeah.
what it takes. And yes, I mean, we have to continue to do interesting products that people want to buy. We've got to do products that are affordable for bars to sell our products.
Hmm.
And so, it's just sort of working in all the directions that make it more accessible, more available to everybody,
Yeah.
and everybody wanting it,
Yeah.
finding a use for it.
Yeah. And speaking of finding a use for it, at the Whiskey Row experience, you can get flights, you can get pours
Mhm,
of all the
mhm,
whiskeys,
right.
also some outstanding cocktails
Yes.
made with your product. And
Sarah Sarah's fabulous. She developed some great. As a matter of fact, this week we're tasting the winter menu, so I
Mhm.
can't wait for that. I think that's Thursday. That'll be the highlight of
Yeah.
my week.
Uh,
But yes, I used to be a, give me a Manhattan. If I'm going to drink a cocktail, that's all
mhm.
I want.
Yeah.
Sarah has converted me to, boy, there's lots of interesting cocktails. I
Yeah.
want to taste them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's where you can appeal to a wider audience as well, as
Yeah,
far as
yeah,
here are some cocktails you can make at home. Now, not all the
yes.
ones that are on the menu at Buzzard's Roost
No,
you can make at
no,
home, because
no.
most of us aren't that talented. But there are
Yeah,
some things that you can do, and
that's right.
using your product that'll make it a lot of
Yeah,
fun.
yeah, yeah. I sort of challenged myself the other night. I'd invited some neighbors over, and I knew that some of them did like to sip whiskey, and they didn't need a cocktail, but some others would want a cocktail.
Mhm.
And I tried to think, oh, I'm finishing work late. I'm in a hurry. What am I going to do? And I realized with about 4 ingredients, I could make at least 3 different cocktails
Mhm.
and offer people a choice. And I thought, that's one of the good things about bourbon. It is very versatile
Right.
in cocktails.
Yes. Yes. And your folks are doing a great job with that
Thank
there on Whiskey Row. So if you're in Louisville, if you're coming to Louisville, you just need to make that a priority stop. You can go on they have a great tour and tasting. You can go back at the still and see Ethan hard at work, and
you.
um, get a cocktail from the bar. You can buy some bottles, some of which are distillery only, right?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right. We always keep some just, only found in at our Whiskey Row location. So
Yeah.
that's
I got
fun for people to search for.
Yeah, the collaboration uh, bourbon
Yeah,
is fantastic, and I
it is.
really enjoy that.
And the single barrel's been out. We sold that during Kentucky Bourbon Festival and
Mhm.
sold out of that. So this Saturday, coming Saturday, well, not, yeah, this Saturday? No. Yeah, 26th. Yeah.
Yes.
We are releasing the small batch.
Okay.
So that'll be fun.
Yeah.
Ethan, that's Ethan's baby. He and his dad picked out that barrel,
Yeah.
and it really is good product.
Yeah. And you talk about wheated bourbons, and your bottled and bond being a wheated bourbon. You've got the grandson of the
Mhm.
wheated bourbon genius,
That's right.
Ethan's grandfather, Steve Nally, who is now
That's it.
at Bardstown Bourbon Company. And so if somebody's going to learn how to do something with wheated bourbons, it's going to be Ethan. So that's a good thing.
That's it. That's it. And when I was, saying I wanted to do a wheated bourbon, and Jason was skeptical, I knew Ethan was on my side, so I knew I
Yeah.
had a backup there.
Yes, absolutely. Uh, well, Judy, I've kept you on here for a little over an hour now, so I want to respect your time. But before we leave here, I want to make sure everybody knows where they can find Buzzard's Roost on social media. Um, so you're on Instagram at Buzzard Roost
Mhm.
Whiskey, on Facebook, the website. The website's great. It's got some good information about the different products you have. So you can go to www.buzzardsroostwhiskey.com and check that out. And Judy, what about you on social media personally?
Yeah, I am on social media, not terribly active. Now and then I'll have a perspective I want to share, but Judy, I couldn't even tell you what it is. I mean, sorry.
I think it's Judith Hollis-Jones. Let's see, I was
Is
just
it?
looking at it. Yeah. Judith.Hollis.Jones on Instagram.
Okay, I couldn't
Yep.
remember. It'd been a while.
Yeah.
I um, just work, work with the social media team and
Hmm.
making sure we're getting the word out about Buzzard Roost and all the
Yeah.
things going on, and don't think about my personal social media a lot.
Our show, again, you can watch us on YouTube. You can listen on your favorite podcast platform as long as it's Apple, Spotify, or Google. We have a Facebook page where we post all of our shows, including this one. We have a Facebook group where we will post what we're drinking, what we're listening to while we're drinking it, many a night. There's been a bottle of Buzzard Roost on the patio with me listening to something good. I really appreciate you being on here, Judy. In all sincerity, I'm very, very happy for you and Jason and your whole
Thank
team, the
you.
success that you're having, and just based upon what you guys have done so far and the leadership that you have every confidence that things are just going to keep getting better and better for you.
Thank you.
So,
Kevin, cheers. Thanks for visiting with me for a while, and
yes.
come see us. We'll lift a glass together soon.
Absolutely. So, on behalf of Judy and myself, until next time, cheers, love,
Cheers,
and
folks.
free bird.